Hi, my name's Kang like Kangaroo, and in this video, I'm going to be giving you some reasons as to why it might not actually be worth getting your green card. Now, just as a quick reminder, I'm not an immigration lawyer, I'm just a dude with a camera, so if you're actually serious about moving to the US, please go talk to a lawyer, they're definitely worth the money. First and foremost, if you're born in a backlog country like India or China, I would honestly, if it were me, just forget about the green card and not really pursue it. The backlog for both of these countries is pretty insane, and it's really stupid to me because the USCIS immigration process is based on country of birth. So say for example, if you're born in China or born in India and then moved to Canada at the age of 1 or like after a month, it still doesn't matter. Too bad, sucks, 10-year backlog. And to be honest, it's a bit of a skill issue. You know, your parents should have thought about that before uprooting their life and moving to Canada, try to give you a better one. That last part's obviously a joke. But even for people who are not born in China or India, the green card process is still very long and drawn out, which leads me to point number 2, which is the wait. Now, the steps for getting a green card through an employment-based visa go something like this. First, you have to get your PERM, which is a labor certification that says that no other person that's already living in the US can do your job. And this will take a long time. The estimates that I'm looking at right now are upwards of a year. And this is assuming that you don't get audited. You know, the USCIS randomly audits some of these PERM applications, which makes the process even longer. After you get your PERM back, you'll receive what's called a priority date. This essentially gives you a spot in line to apply to adjust your status to become a permanent resident. And this part, while you're waiting in line, can take a while as well. Like I said earlier, China and India are currently backlogged, and it's during this process where they're waiting for their priority date to become current so that they can apply for adjustment of status is where they're actually waiting. Now, once your priority date is current, you can file for the adjustment of status. Now, this part in particular takes a pretty long time. Now, during this time, you cannot leave the US until you get your advanced parole, which is a travel document that your company can apply for at the same time when applying for your adjustment of status. Now, another note I want to make is a lot of companies won't go directly from TN to green card. They'll instead opt to make you get an H-1B first and then go to the green card process. So if you're in that circumstance and your company doesn't want to do the TN to green card, you're going to have to wait a longer amount of time because you have to wait for the H-1B lottery and get lucky. So let me just reiterate that this is a very big time commitment. In the best case scenario, I'm assuming you're going to be looking at maybe 2.5 to 3 years, but it could take way longer depending if you get audited during the perm stage or if you have to wait for H-1B or one of the many other things that could go wrong during this process. Now, if we're being honest, a 3-year time commitment in the grand scheme of your whole entire career, especially if you're going to be planning to stay and immigrating to the US, is not that big of a deal. Now, on the other hand, this is a pretty significant chunk of time if you don't actually plan to live in the US long term and you plan to go back to Canada or whatever country you're from. Now, another point that I want to bring up is that you essentially have to stay at this company while you're doing this green card process the whole entire time. Now, at the very end of the process, you can apply for your EAD, but the stage at which you can apply for your EAD is pretty far into the process, and it's at the very end during adjustment of status. So you're basically going to have to stay at the company that sponsored you for a long time. Now, there's a study that gets passed around pretty often that says people who stay at their company for more than 2 to 3 years make 50% less over the lifetime of their career. Now, I want you to ask yourself, is this long, complicated, and drawn out process worth it when considering how strong the Canadian TN visa is? Which actually leads me to my third point, which is that the green card doesn't actually provide that much more flexibility or stability when comparing it to the TN or the H-1B visa. Now, the green card provides a lot of stability in the sense that if you get laid off from your job or whatever, you don't have to leave the country within 60 days and you can just live in the US without being tied to an employer, but does not provide stability in the sense that it protects you from layoffs, if that makes sense. If you have a green card or a work visa, in either case, you're still going to have to be applying for jobs. Another thought to consider is that the job pool doesn't expand that much once you get your green card. If you're someone that works in tech and only wants to do a W-2 job and not explore side hustles and not start your own business, what's to stop you from staying on the TN visa, perpetually renewing it, and getting new TN visas at different jobs? The TN visa is pretty widely known at this point and is infinitely renewable. Now, you might have some issues at some smaller companies or companies that specifically do not want to sponsor, but ask yourself, is expanding your pool to these companies worth the process and the time of getting the green card? Just as a thought experiment, I would go on LinkedIn and look for companies that you want to work for and then search the people and filter by school alum to see what kind of companies would sponsor for H-1B or TN visa sponsorship. Now, I want to say that this advice in particular applies a lot to TN visas because that's what I'm familiar with and that's what I have. But if you're in the situation where you have an H-1B visa, it might be different because the H-1B has a time limit of 6 years. Now, I'm not that well versed in the H-1B visa because, like I said, I don't have one. I'm on the TN, so I don't really know too much about it. Now, the next point that I want to make is all about taxes. Now, once you receive your green card, you're essentially put on a 7-year time limit to figure out if you want to naturalize and become a U.S. citizen or leave. The reason for this is after 8 calendar years of having your green card, you become what's called a covered expatriate. So after this 8-year time period, you become this covered expatriate, and you want to leave the US, you're going to have to be forced to pay an exit tax on all of your assets. Now, this is basically going to do a deemed disposition where they'll on paper sell all of your assets and rebuy it at the fair market value and tax you on those gains. Now, this could potentially lead to huge tax burdens. I mean, for a lot of people, the whole entire point of coming to the US was coming here, making a lot of money, stacking your bands, and investing. So imagine your face when you leave the US and you're hit with like $100,000, $200,000 tax bill. Now, this only applies if you leave the US after getting your green card after 8 calendar years. If you leave before 8 years, like 7 years, for example, you don't have to pay the exit tax because you're not considered a covered expat. That's why I said you have essentially 7 to 8 years to really determine if you want to stay in the US long term and you want to naturalize. Now, instead of going through the hassle of getting your green card and then putting yourself on a time limit once you get it, what's to stop you from perpetually working on TN visas and living here as long as you like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and then eventually retiring or like moving back to Canada? Now, another fun fact that I want to tell you is that if you move back to Canada, you are not taxed on the assets that you are bringing in. All the assets that you will be bringing back to Canada will do an adjusted cost basis based on the day that you moved back to Canada. Now, I think a lot of people don't know about the exit tax when they're looking at the green card. It's not something that would really cross their mind. And I personally think that it's a very big concern in your long-term financial planning, and you might not realize it in the very beginning of your career, but I'm telling you now, it's a very important thing to consider. Now, I'm not making this video to say that the green card is stupid and that you shouldn't get it. I just think a lot of people don't realize how long and complex it is and all of the trade-offs that come with getting the green card. I've seen a lot of my friends get burned during this process thinking that the green card is a perfect fit for them, and then only to do more research and realize like, hey, this is actually not what I want for my future or for my financial future. So I will say that this decision is very specific from person to person, and there's no blanket answer to say that, yeah, you should get your green card if you do XYZ. So hopefully this video has shown some insight as to why you should consider not getting your green card and some of the trade-offs that come with getting the green card. And I know that when I learned about these things, especially the exit tax, I was like super shook. I've also been getting a lot of DMs asking for advice, resume reviews, or just, connecting to chat, which is really great. And while I don't think I'm an expert on like any of these things, like I'm literally just a dude with a camera, I do think that there's a lot of people who are asking the similar questions. So there needs to be some sort of community built around this. So I've been thinking about starting like a Discord channel or a school community to kind of share ideas and find like-minded individuals, because I know that there are people out there like myself. So if that interests you, please let me know down in the comments and I can work to get something like that set up. Now, despite these trade-offs and cons, I would still heavily consider getting my green card. And if you're curious as to why in particular, you should watch this video right here where I go over 3 reasons why you should get your green card.